Hi everyone, thank you for joining. My name is Chad Sanderson, and today I'm going to be talking about KPI-driven product development. A little bit about me before we start. I am the Chief Operator of Data Quality Camp, which is a Slack group aimed at data engineering and data governance professionals on how you implement data quality at scale. Prior to that, I ran the data platform at a company called Convoy, which is a Seattle-based freight technology two-sided marketplace. And I focused very heavily on ensuring the quality of our data was good, but also on how to leverage that data for experimentation and machine learning. Before that, I worked on the experimentation platform team at Microsoft. And as you might expect, Microsoft does an enormous amount of experimentation, from Bing to Xbox to Windows. It's woven into a daily part of software development. And I learned a ton there, but I also learned that while experimentation is amazing for really big companies, it also works for smaller companies as well, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So, to start off with, what is KPI-driven software development? Well, if you haven't heard the term KPI, it means Key Performance Indicator, and it is becoming an essential in today's executive meetings. So if you're a Chief Product Officer or CMO or a CSO or a CDO, you have probably been asked at some point to supply KPIs at the quarterly and yearly level. So why is that? Well, the reason is we're moving away from this world of assumptions and hypotheses and to a world of KPIs that are actually mapped to some type of quantitative measurement. So instead of just making guesses, our hypotheses are backed by something real in the world, and that's what science is. So the quote that I like so much is, "What doesn't get measured doesn't matter." And we're starting to see that play out at a massive scale in organizations both large and small. So what is the cause of this? Why are we seeing this huge shift towards KPIs and quantification of all of our goals? Well, the big reason is because it's very easy to talk about how we personally feel about a feature or marketing campaign or SEO tactic based on our experiences at previous companies. But it's a very different thing to understand how that feature or initiative actually works in the real world when we get it in front of customers. Now, product teams in particular need to really care about KPIs and metrics. And the reason why is it's not so easy for us to simply pull a revenue or a margin number out of the air and attribute it to our work. And that's because for many product teams, what we're actually trying to improve is reducing churn or increasing usage or getting our customers to use more of our functionality on the expectation that they will pay more for it later. So we need to be very, very thoughtful about the metrics that we put forth. So now we've kind of established that KPIs are not going away. Every single business is using them, and they can get kind of complicated for product teams. But there's a problem, which is today that sort of measurement and quantification is very easy for sales and marketing teams. In fact, there's lots of tools that are available right now to help those sales and marketing organizations measure the impact of their work. And I would even say inherently these teams have always strived for KPIs and a metric-oriented framework to manage their promotions and to decide their resourcing. Sales executives, account executives, SDRs, all these various groups have their own targets that they are required to hit on a quarterly, on a yearly, and on a multi-yearly cadence. And as I mentioned, there is a huge industry of software that supports all of these individuals, from Google Analytics to personalization software like Mutiny to retargeting software and to CRMs like Salesforce. All of these tools essentially work together in a type of ecosystem that facilitates measurement specifically for the sales and marketing organization. And that puts product teams in a pretty tough spot, because now you're going into the executive meeting and you're going up against sales and marketing leaders who are armed with huge amounts of data. And this enables them to advocate for new projects and resources that a lot of product leaders just are not able to do themselves. And that's tough because, as we all know, product is important. But if you don't have the ability to advocate for yourself with clear metrics, then it makes it very challenging to have a seat at the table. And on product teams specifically, this can be hard because we also often have larger resourcing needs than sales and marketing teams do. Anytime you're beginning a new software engineering initiative or you're trying to launch a large product, there is a minimum amount of engineering, product manager, design, and data science support that is required to get that product off the ground. To say another way, there is a tremendous cold start problem at play here where it takes a lot of momentum and cost and resources to start to crank the wheel until we start seeing all of those major impacts from the product being deployed much later. So how do you get to a point where the business is willing to take a risk to give you all the resources on the promise that you'll be able to deliver the ROI at some point in the future? Well, this is where experimentation comes in. Experimentation is an amazing tool at providing leverage for product teams in order to justify their spend on resources both currently and in the future. Why is that? Well, in order to understand, we need to understand a little bit about experimentation itself. How does it work? One of the biggest value adds of experimentation is a concept called the randomized controlled trial. And what that means is we have users from, we are essentially splitting users into two groups, a control group and a treatment group. And the treatment group sees the feature that we are deploying and the control group does not. Now, what that does is it allows us to say, you know what, these two groups are essentially identical in almost every way. The randomization accounts for that. The only area that we know for sure they are not identical is that one group has seen the feature, and therefore any significant delta between the KPI that we care about between those two groups can be attributed to the feature itself. Now, you can run an experiment for a single feature, you can run them for multiple features, you can run them for multiple features at the same time. In fact, you can aggregate the impacts of multiple features for an entire product organization, and you can use that to go to your CFO and to go to your CEO and say, hey, look, we have measured the impact of all of our features over the last quarter, over the last 6 months, and this is the amount of value that they have added to the bottom line. We're talking dollars and cents, margin, revenue, sales, potentially costs saved, and all of that can be used to make a prediction on what our impact would be if we were to hire more resources that ran more experiments. One of the other really amazing things about experimentation is that it doesn't just need to be used to identify the impacts on the features themselves. We can also use experimentation to identify where we need to be changing our product in order to better fit certain cohorts of users. So as an example, when I was at Microsoft, we ran a feature for Microsoft Outlook, which I don't know if people still use, but it is a pretty awesome emailing system. And back in those days, we had an app on the phone, and like a lot of other apps, there was a little red icon that you could click that showed you how many notifications or how many new emails that you had. Now, Outlook had this hypothesis that if they added that red notification number to their application, they would get way more people clicking on the app, opening it, and ultimately engaging, just seeing how much of an awesome product it was. They designed the experiment, they deployed it, they ran it, and they ended it, and guess what? They were correct. According to the KPIs that we cared about, the number of app opens, the number of emails opens, and the number of emails sent, all of those were up and to the right significantly. So the feature had worked, and that was fantastic. However, what experimentation was also able to uncover was that there were two distinct categories of users. One group of users that saw this significant improvement in all of their metrics, and another category of users that saw no improvement in the metrics at all. Upon looking into that further, what the engineering team realized is that this group that hadn't seen any improvement, actually there was a bug in the phone type that blocked the notification from showing. So there was thousands, even millions of people that weren't seeing this amazing feature because of a bug, and we only noticed that bug through experimentation. So experimentation can have way more benefits than just looking at the impact of the feature itself. Now, hopefully at this point I have convinced you that experimentation is unbelievably valuable for a product team and getting a seat at the table compared to sales and marketing teams who are already coming into those meetings with lots of data and lots of evidence. So the next question is, how do you drive the adoption of experimentation at your organization? How do you start this process? And what are some of the tactical things that you can do to really get the entire product, all the stakeholders in the product lifecycle on board? Well, there's a phrase that I like to use, which is experimentation takes a village, meaning there's multiple team members, multiple job functions that all have a different role to play. There are product managers who are creating features. They're designing requirements and sending them to software engineers. There's software engineers who have to build and test and validate those features. There are analysts and data scientists who need to analyze the impact of the experiment and look through all the data, sift through the different segments of users and understand how they were individually impacted. So this is a lot of work, and getting people to do all of that work requires some incentive. Each one of those stakeholders needs to benefit from the experimentation system that you're rolling out, and so therefore the platform has to have some positive impact on their daily lives outside of experimentation. So we could talk about all three of those stakeholders, but I want to specifically focus on software engineers. And that's because software engineers often have different goals in mind than your typical product team. Product managers like to ship features, and they like to ship features really, really fast. And speed is the best, and speed is excellent. However, if you talk to your typical engineer, the types of things that they usually want are stability and safety and great documentation and maintenance and reusability. And the reason why is that they are judged according to those parameters. Great engineering cultures almost always manage their promotions based on how safe an engineer is being when deploying code, how high quality is the code that they have written, and how well are they working from a systematic and programmatic perspective to integrate into the rest of the organization. So the question is, even though experimentation is designed primarily to really help CPOs lobby for impact and lobby for resources, how is it useful for a software engineer who's primarily concerned with safety and shipping? And the answer is actually, it's great for that. Experimentation is one of the best tools possible at extending the software development lifecycle into production. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is when software engineers are going through their typical day, they are looking at requirement documents, they're creating technical specs, they're building in local staging developer environments, they're testing and iterating and testing and trying to make certain pieces of the product that they've built failed. They are pushing into production, and then they're using tools like LaunchDarkly to manage the gradual exposure of that feature to new customers. Now, why do they do that? Well, they do that because if there's any bugs, if there are any issues with the feature that they've rolled out, and it's hard to 100% account for these before you've actually deployed features, then you need to capture that before the blast radius becomes too large. So they are very, very risk averse. Risk aversion is a huge part of the software developer mentality. So how do we factor experimentation into that? Well, that's because that sort of risk aversion doesn't just stop after we deploy the code. We need to also care about how our users are actually engaging with the feature, not just if there are bugs and errors. So for example, if we've deployed a feature and we're not getting any JavaScript errors and our latency is okay, that's awesome. But what happens if the feature isn't working? If our customers aren't engaging with it, or even worse, it's causing our customers not to use the platform anymore. That's also a quality issue, and it's something that engineers need to be aware of and thoughtful about as they're rolling out code. The problem is that prior to now, that has been very difficult for a software engineer to do. There's not really a good way to measure business impact until much later on in the process. However, if you use certain styles of experimentation, not only is it easy to measure those impacts, it's actually trivial. And that's what I want to talk about next, which is the types of experimentation methodologies that you can use as a software engineer and a product team to gradually introduce this process of do no harm. So, do no harm experimentation is all about measuring the potential negative impacts of a feature after you roll it out. So, statistics is a very wide field, and there's many different forms of A/B tests. There are some types of experiments that only look at positive impacts. There are some type of experiments that are designed specifically for machine learning, and there are some type of experiments that only look at potential negative impacts. Now, these are different experimental techniques, and interestingly enough, if you are only checking that a feature was not significantly negative, this takes less time to run than than checking for if a feature was significantly positive. So in the world of experimentation, we judge experiments based on the amount of time that they take to complete, and this can be significant. So if you're a company that doesn't have a lot of traffic and you're trying to run A/B tests and you're looking for positive signals, it might take you weeks in order to get a significant signal on some feature that you've deployed. However, on that same amount of traffic, if all you want to test is that my feature is not breaking anything, if it's not causing any regressions for my customers, that can actually be done in a much shorter window of time. So you can start to wrap experimentation as part of the typical product development lifecycle, along with checking for errors, checking for bugs, and doing all of your testing, looking at the metrics and ensuring that they aren't breaking for your most meaningful customers, and also looking at the various segments of customers that you have in your organization and ensuring that there's no cohorts of users that might be getting a bad experience. This is a great starting point for experimentation in a company. But where do you go from here? Well, here's my suggestion. The easiest way to ensure experimentation is adopted across a company is to start small. It's to start with one use case, with one team, with a product manager and an engineer that really see the value out of it. Now, once you've proved out the value of experimentation, you have that use case and you've written it down and you've written down how it impacted your KPIs, then you can take that elsewhere in the company. I've done this multiple times where I've been on road shows inside of Convoy, inside of Microsoft, and inside my previous places of working like Subway and Sephora, where we would show the impact of experimentation and the power it has when catching things that are bad. I remember rolling out a feature at Convoy, and that feature essentially was showing our trucking customers a list of potential shipments that they might want to take. It was an offer relevance model. And we shipped that feature. We had really high hopes for it, but our experimentation system saw something very interesting, which is that most of the users who are landing on that page were jumping off of it. They were essentially closing out of the app after only 30 seconds or a minute or so. And upon further investigation, what we observed was happening is that there was a bug. The bug was not outwardly apparent if we were just looking at our typical engineering metrics, but when we looked at the business metrics like impressions and scrolls and app exits, then it was very, very clear. So by taking that example, we could shop it around at the rest of the company. We drummed up a lot of excitement for experimentation, and that's what started the ball rolling on bringing experimentation into the business as a first order methodology. And once that happened, our executives started requiring that basically every single KPI that we had needed to be measured and enforced through experimentation. That got the entire business to focus on measurement. It aligned us around the same goals, and it actually allowed us to move faster, knowing that we were deploying in a very safe way and that we could measure the impacts of our features in the future. That's my time. The last thing that I would say is I really strongly encourage everybody to think about the science of experimentation. Focus on the measurement. Think about the metrics that are important to you. If you haven't done it already, just think about like what could matter to our customers and what do we want to see. And then start from a use case that's incredibly meaningful, work from there, deploy your first experiment, measure it, and then take it to the rest of the company. So that's my time. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and good luck.